Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Today, we're going to be looking at some things that, remind us of how good the Division 1 was, and hopefully we're able to see how we can effect change for the Division 2. Now, I'm looking at gear sets in this video. If you guys don't know, I've been doing a retrospective for the Division 1 and some of its merits and some of its demerits, and we're just talking in general. I'm not trying to beat or bash anybody. I'm just trying to point out things that have worked in the old game, and I'm trying to provide, in my mind, a case and an argument why those things need to show up in this second game. And that's from the player perspective as well. So I'm looking at gear sets, and I'm going to pick one gear set from the Division 1 that was very good, in my opinion. And I'll pick another gear set from Division 2, and I'm going to compare them in terms of design, in terms of, how cleverly done they were. And I'll talk about accessibility. So those three things. So the first thing I'll do is the first gear set is Predator's Mark. I'll pick Predator's Mark from Division 1. Design, implementation, amazing. They made Predator's Mark in different iterations. Regular Predator's Mark that was, from back in the day, a 4-piece. But the premise was still that if you tagged somebody with 10 bullets, they will bleed. And then by the time you got to the classified version, which is where I actually want to park the bus on that gear set, the classified version was very, very powerful. And I'm going to stick with the PvE side. So PvP people, if you were about to type a comment, you might as well just delete that comment about, oh, it was terrible for PvP. I don't care. I didn't play PvP. So that's just how I feel about PvP in the Division 2. It just wasn't for me. I wasn't good at it. So don't care about it. But in the PvE side, it was a very solid gear set because it allowed you to play very differently. It actually forced you to make decisions that for some strange reason, you were not necessarily too thrilled about making those decisions. But in the heat of combat, you had to make them anyways. So if you maybe tagged somebody with 8 bullets and they went into cover, an enemy, an NPC, you could sit there and wait, oh man, are they going to get out of cover so I can hit him with that one last bullet? Or am I going to go find them in cover at risk of, getting taken down? Or am I going to face another target, which will allow for which will go and reset your entire bullet count for that bleed damage? And so little things like that really made Predator's Mark very interesting from a gameplay aspect because it provided like a mini game inside of a game. It kind of gave you a challenge because these NPCs will run up and down and then they'll go hide in one little spot and you can't complete your 10 shots on them. That's a very fun way to play an RPG game, especially when it's a shooting game. And, a lot of things can't necessarily be done within the parameters of, militaristic style, gameplay. And so Predator's Mark was there. It was good. And it was accessible, and that's accessibility, what I want to talk about, which is everybody could farm and get their hands on Predator's Mark and the classified version. There were global events, there was resistance, there were, missions where classifieds could drop if you actually did them and if you completed them. There were all kinds of ways to acquire classified items. Yes, they may have been somewhat sparse, if you understand what I mean. You could open chests, you could open caches. I was opening caches and the classified item dropped one time for me. I even made a video about it that got 100,000 views and all that good stuff. So this was one of the things that they actually did so well in the Division 1. Now, let's look at the Division 2, and I'll pick another gear set, and this gear set I'm going to just go with Aces and Eights. Aces and Eights is a very, very powerful gear set. It's a good damage support, gear set, and it provides you, and if you're in a team, your team with more buffs. The gear set implementation is amazing because of the way everything works. It gives your team so many buffs, gives you so many buffs, and you feel the joy in playing a marksman in a game like this, where you're dominating because you're using a marksman rifle, and that's one of the things that the Aces and Eights gear set actually does. So in design, Aces and Eights receives a 10 out of 10 because it was just one of the most, important gear sets, especially when it came to the raid. And then in implementation, in how they actually said, okay, this has to only work with the marksman rifle under these conditions. And then, if you use the specialization for a sharpshooter, then you're able to activate this, this gear set and use everything that comes with it. I think that was actually solid because then that way you're not able to kind of maybe double dip in every kind of corner. You just stick with your lane and you play the sharpshooter, position and the sharpshooter role just solely, and you're making sure that is your job and you make sure you're doing it well. So amazing gear set. So what does this tell us though about, Massive? This tells me something about Massive is they have great ideas. They know how to make gear sets I can understand maybe people saying gear sets ruin PvP, and some people saying, well, gear sets shouldn't even be in PvP. That's an argument for another day. But we have to still come down to it and say some good gear sets have literally graced this game over time. Even the gear sets that were kind of poor in the Division 2, some of them have been revamped. Look at True Patriot. Ongoing Directive. I don't know about True Patriot. I don't know if there's any revamp done to it. Ongoing Directive is a very sought out, gear set right now. If you guys remember, when it was first released, nobody wanted it. What's the name of the other one that works with the survivalist specialization? I can't remember the name. The one that has like a pulse, thing. That one also was kind of mediocre. And then after the patch, they actually revamped it and made it really strong that they had to go back and kind of dial it down a little bit. So yes, gear sets do well in this game in the PvE aspect without any hesitation, without any problems from anyone. Now it's in PvP, we have to argue as to the merits of even some gear sets ever being in there. But if you have been listening, I did not specifically mention one thing in terms of this whole video, and that is accessibility. So how many people could get their hands on Aces and Eights when it first was released? Not a lot of people. And I think that's where Massive shot themselves in the foot, because if you think about it, you make these gear sets and then you go and lock one of them exclusively exclusively inside a piece of content that people may or may not be interested in doing. And that's where a lot of the community had a real problem, because if you go say something like the Aces and Eights, maybe you have a team of 4 people in the dark zone, you have one person running Aces and Eights, they have an unfair advantage over everybody else because these gear sets was actually locked behind the raid. Now you can say, well, everybody has to go find a way to play their raid and all. That's not the way the Division was designed. What made the Division 1 better than the Division 2 was you could access every single piece of gear by doing regular missions and regular things. Yes, I understand that at first, Falcon Lost was one of the missions people will farm a lot of gear sets. You had to complete incursions to get specific gear set items on the PvE side. It was very difficult, actually, to get gear sets in the Division 1 at one time. But the developers knew this, and so they changed it. They went and, started revamping the game and bringing gear sets to be available to everybody, to be able to reach and have fun and enjoy what they've worked on. And then when they opened the Division 2 up, they started doing the exact same things that they did in Division 1 by making gear and making things hard to get. And in my opinion, I'm thinking to myself, why would they be making the same mistakes that they made in the earlier patch 1.2, 1.3 days of the Division 1? Is it that they're using the same strategy to try to keep people playing, which is clearly not working? Because the 2016 and 2019, 2020 marketplace for video games is more cutthroat than it actually was. I think then Massive had they had the playing field, but now that playing field is going to be taken away drastically. The lineup of games coming out in 2020, Q1 and Q2, it will make your jaw drop. I think they overplayed their hand in not paying attention to the mistakes that they made in the Division 1, and then they brought those same mistakes to the Division 2, and now it's going to be a very tough market out there. I mean, think about next year. They're saying, oh yeah, we're going to bring Episode 3. Is Episode 3 going to compete with Cyberpunk 2077, sorry? That's the card game is Cyberpunk 2020. Is Episode 3 going to be able to compete with that Resident Evil game? And that Resident Evil game is actually getting a multiplayer. And it's a third-person shooter if they follow the Resident Evil pattern, which has always been third-person shooters. So this is exactly what we're talking about. And then you look at the way they eventually backtracked and said, oh, you know what? You can now get 4 of those pieces, outside of the raid. And, you can only get 2 exclusively in the raid, which makes no sense because you can use 4 to complete the entire, brand set. But, for those of you who don't play the raid, you will never be able to achieve the full 6-piece and get all the benefits where you can now mix and match and build, which is still partially holding on to that old ideology. And let me tell you why they're doing this. Because there is a huge lack of content in the game. Whether you agree or not, the Division 2 suffers from content sparsity. And I think they were not necessarily, banking on how content hungry we were from the Division 1 waiting to the Division 2 that they came out with the regular base game with a little bit of stuff, and then we played through it and we said, well, where's the rest of it? Which I think goes back to the argument for those who have always said that the Division 2 should not have been a game. It should have been a series of expansions over time. DC map could have been an expansion, because at that point, the same game is what we're going to be playing. We go to DC, we go back to, New York. We play our New York map. We play whatever new map they bring out in DC. They say, oh, guys, DC is the next frontier, and then they design it within the game. So these are the mistakes that have been made over the course of these two games. And like I've said, I feel like it's just a lot of the corporate strings that have actually pushed for, specific goals to try to make, more money and all that. And then it just eventually just did not go right. And I'm not against anybody trying to make more money, because, you got to pay your developers. Like, developers are not cheap, so everybody wants to maximize profits. But at the same time, if you look at a CEO's paycheck compared to like a developer, there's a huge disparity. So what is the extra money going towards? That at the risk of destroying the entire IP, they reach for, all these crazy things to try to make more money and then not achieve it anyways. So everybody still is at a loss. Developers who have put in the time and the effort and the work, they feel deflated because they could not pursue their original dream in terms of how to make the game fun. Instead, they want to, pursue other things that are just strange to gamers. So that's where I'm going to rest my case and my argument. And I hope that Massive is able to say, oh, this was a mistake that we made, and try their best not to make that mistake again. So if you guys are, still watching, thank you very much for your time and audience. I appreciate you for even making it to the end of this video. My next video, hopefully, I want to look at things in terms of nerfing and buffing items and using that as a, play extension on the game, and how that is just having a negative effect on the player base, and how Massive needs to deter from that. And just instead of focusing on overhauling as using balance as an excuse, they need to focus more on fun and challenging content to keep the player base playing. That's all I have for today, and I guess I'll see you in my next video. Peace.